For more on all of this, let's welcome in NewsNation senior political contributor George Will. George, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Glad to be with you.
So, George, what was your biggest takeaway from this weekend speeches and the fair side chats, as they're called, in Iowa?
Well, the growing animosity and public animosity between DeSantis and Trump is obvious. This is grounded in the fact, I think, a certain frustration on Governor DeSantis's part because he's been actively campaigning now since May, and he's not made a dent in the solid lead that Mr. Trump has. Indeed, he's had to reboot his campaign at least once. And so the story has been dysfunction in the DeSantis campaign, not DeSantis closing the gap.
Yeah, and you did an op-ed for the Washington Post last month saying that you don't believe either of the GOP frontrunners, Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, will ultimately get the party's nomination. Now, I know a lot has happened over the last month. Have your thoughts changed on this at all?
They have not changed. The political market basically works in our country. When there's a very strong demand for something, the market usually supplies what is demanded. And there's a tremendous demand in the country, unprecedented really, to not have a rerun of 2020, to not have Biden against Trump. A majority of Democrats don't want Biden to be the party nominee. And a majority of Republicans want something new. So I do think the market is going to work. And I don't think DeSantis has shown much promise in the first 2.5, 3 months of his active campaigning since he entered the race in May, that he's catching on. So I think there's more fluidity in this than the polls might currently suggest.
So then, if not Trump, if not DeSantis, which candidate on the periphery right now does stand to benefit the most if neither of those two get the nomination?
Well, I have to make my usual disclosure here that my wife works for the Scott campaign. I do think Scott has the cheerfulness lane all to himself. He's the one who's sort of happy about America. Nikki Haley's campaigning very hard. The former Vice President, Mr. Pence, was going to get the attention a former Vice President deserves. You've got a former governor of New Jersey and Chris Christie, former governor of Arkansas and Asa Hutchins. A lot of talent on a very deep Republican bench yet to be looked at and vetted by the voters.
Is there anyone in particular who you think stands a good chance?
Well, I think you're apt to get someone, I'm going to say Scott, even though it sounds like I have a conflict of interest, but beyond that, pay attention to the governor of Virginia. Glenn Youngkin is in the wings. He's trying to capture the Senate in Virginia, in that purple state. And if the people currently in the race begin to falter, and no one seems to be able to bring Trump back to the pack, there are going to be a large number of Republican donors and office holders who will turn to Glenn Youngkin and try and entice him into the race.
I do want to talk about the legal front quickly. Trump, of course, already facing 3 indictments, a 4th may be on the way soon. And those reports saying a Georgia district attorney is preparing to convene a grand jury this week. We're watching all of this, but do you think there is a point for Republican voters of enough is enough here?
I think there probably is. Whether a 4th criminal indictment will do it, I don't know. But I do think the American people are exhausted and embarrassed by the condition of our public life. They want a little bit of dignity in it. And with on the Biden side, Hunter Biden being a constant nagging embarrassment, the Republican side, this cascade of indictments being embarrassing, I think the fact that Republicans haven't reached the enough is enough stage yet does not mean that they won't soon.
Always appreciate the time and perspective. George Will, NewsNation senior political contributor. Thank you so much.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.